We are live.
Live from Mount Shasta. It's Monday night. Only people of the right generation know where that joke comes from. Those of you from the wrong generations who only lived on reruns and the late versions. What's that? Yeah, but you didn't see live the original show with the original not ready for primetime players. Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Chevy Chase. Need I go on? Garrett Morris, Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin, Bill Murray. Yeah. Okay, it's the Toltec discussions with Golden Eagle, who is me. And we are discussing Toltec stuff. I am a Tolteca. Gloria is a Tolteca. Melody is a Tolteca. Question.
Nothing. Just waiting.
Oh, did you switch the camp? Oh, well, then this doesn't do you anything to it.
I'm waving to you.
Oh, later, baby.
All right.
Not right now on live internet TV. So, the three aspects of the Toltec are
warrior, stalker, dreamer.
Yeehaw, George, ding, ding, ding. 3 dingy dings.
No, just one.
I'm the one who awards dings. And I've got 2 swords in front of me. Do you really want to argue the point? I didn't think so. 3 dingy dings for George on what may be his last night at Mount Shasta for a while.
Last night or last night?
Last week, last Monday night discussion. The dreamer, the stalker, and the warrior, we all have these 3 core natures. If you study esoteric philosophies, you will very quickly, very easily relate these to other things you have studied, such as the Kabbalistic tree of life. I'll wait till Melody returns. I want to ask her this question specifically. Where on the tree of life do the 3 Toltec natures reside?
Columns?
Wherever they are at. It could be columns, it could be paths, or it could be spheres, or it could be worlds.
Go with your first instinct.
I was thinking it was. I think we were talking about the columns. Was it feminine?
The what? Speak up.
The feminine path is it
Is what?
the dreamer?
Is
Is the feminine path, right? And then the warrior would be masculine, and then the stalker would be the middle part. Does that make sense?
almost. You got 1 out of the 3 correct.
Okay.
Which 2 do you have swapped?
The outer two.
No.
Okay, so then is the woman the stalker?
Which is the pillar of, okay. Which of the dreamer, stalker, and warrior would you attribute to the pillar of wisdom? Using some of the other uses of pillars. Is it the warrior? Quick answer. Okay. Okay, the chord length is,
I'm trying to get to this camera because we're seeing the fan and we're not seeing Melody. So do you want me to keep using these other cameras? They have to cover where people are at.
okay, don't forget to, I'm not going to worry about it tonight. We'll talk afterwards. So the pillar of wisdom corresponds to the feminine pillar. The hokama, the sphere at the top, is the sphere of wisdom. So that defines when we look at it, the right hand, when you superimpose it, the left hand pillar as the pillar of wisdom. So the stalker corresponds to the pillar of wisdom. The warrior corresponds to the pillar of strength. Okay, so that would be the left-hand column as you look at it, the right-hand column as you superimpose it and you step backwards into it.
Mhm.
Which leaves the center pillar, the so-called pillar of beauty, to correspond with the dreamer. Okay. So this is one of the many, many ways how you start to compare systems. Legitimate spiritual systems all have to conform to the tree of life, and these are the kinds of tests you can give. So what we're doing in our current series of discussions is we're exploring more of our warrior nature. And there is symbolism associated with that. The warrior nature has at the base of the pillar of strength is the sphere of hope, which is our mental nature. That's the mental plane, the upper astral and the mental plane. And so the number one symbol of the warrior is the sword. And the sword corresponds to the air element, which is why I have my smaller sword here in the east. And the sword, the air element corresponds to the mental sphere. So we're working on this to enhance the mental nature and the warrior philosophy, the warrior mind. It's not that I expect all of you to go out and pick up swords and learn sword fighting or take up martial arts. And although you may, you have my permission to. You have my permission to train with me. More on that later. So we spent a couple of weeks talking about the warrior nature as defined by famed Japanese samurai Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote a book called The Book of Five Rings. We spent 2 weeks going through the highlights of how one approaches the warrior philosophy and how that hones and refines the mind into following the path, the Tao, the way, as it's referred to. And the level of discipline that's required. In the famous shamanic textbook series called Dune, the Dune series, written by famous shaman Frank Herbert, set in a futuristic world. The famed sword master, blade master as he was called, Gurney Halleck, is retained by the Duke Atreides to train his son and heir, Paul, in an era where murder and assassination are commonplace. And Gurney shows up at young Paul's apartment one day at an unexpected time and says, "It's time for your next training session." And young Paul's response is, "I don't want it. I'm not in the mood." And so Gurney pulls his sword and attacks, deliberately trying to hurt him. And Paul quickly responds and they fight and they come to a draw. And they agree, they call it a draw, and they each have a knife at each other's throat. Okay, draw. He said, you finally started fighting well near the end, is what Gurney tells him. And Paul's like, "What the heck did you do that for?" I told you I wasn't in the mood. And Gurney said, "I don't care. You have to be ready to fight when you must. And mood has nothing to do with it." I think he said, "Mood is for music and lovemaking. You fight when you must." And that's a good summary of the warrior philosophy, where the warrior, in the Toltec way, it isn't just picking up the sword and fighting. It's taking appropriate action. When the window of opportunity is there and you have to act and you have to act now, or bad stuff happens, then you act now. You train that mind to recognize the circumstances and you act. So today, we're going to do some explorations with a book called The Art of War. Can this be seen?
Yeah.
The Art of War by someone named Sun Tzu has a foreword by famed author James Clavell, who wrote the very famous book. It became a movie and a television series called Shogun, about a European, which is based on a true story actually. European ends up in Japan, spends the rest of his life there, never does get back to Europe, which is his like main objective, and becomes a samurai, and becomes the chosen protege of the shogun at the time. So in the introduction, this is a translation of The Art of War, and with a foreword by James Clavell. So this is James Clavell's writing, and the part I'm going to read is he's quoting an ancient author. Unfortunately, little is known of the man himself or when he wrote these 13 chapters. Some ascribe them to approximately 500 BC in the kingdom of Wu, some to approximately 300 BC. About 100 BC, one of his chroniclers, Sima Qian, gives this biography. Sun Tzu, whose personal name was Wu, was a native of the Qi state. His Art of War brought him to the notice of Ho Lu, king of Wu. Ho Lu said to him, "I have carefully perused your 13 chapters. May I submit your theory of managing soldiers to a test, or to a slight test?" Sun Tzu replied, "You may." The king asked, "May the test be applied to women?" The answer was again in the affirmative. So arrangements were made to bring 180 ladies out of the palace. Sun Tzu divided them into 2 companies and placed one of the king's favorite concubines at the head of each. He then made them all take spears in their hands and addressed them thus: "I presume you know the difference between front and back, right hand and left hand." And the girls all replied, "Well, yes." "When I say eyes front, you must look straight ahead, the locus. When I say left turn, you must face towards your left hand. When I say right turn, you must face towards your right hand. When I say about turn, you must face right around toward the back." Again, the girls assented. They knew what to do. We assume, although it's not clearly stated, that he showed them, what does this mean? Right turn, left turn, about turn, and all that. And so Sun Tzu said patiently, "If words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, then the general is to blame." He started drilling them again, and this time he gave the order, "Left turn," whereupon the girls once more burst into fits of laughter. Oh wait, I skipped a paragraph. Again, the girls assented. They knew the instructions. The words of command having been thus explained, he set up the halberds and battle axes in order to begin the drill. Then, to the sound of drums, he gave the order, "Right turn," but the girls only burst out laughing. Sun Tzu said patiently, "If words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, then the general is to blame." He started drilling them again, and this time gave the order, "Left turn," whereupon the girls once more burst into fits of laughter. Then he said, if the words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, the general is to blame. But if his orders are clear, and the soldiers nevertheless disobey, then it is the fault of their officers. So saying, he ordered the leaders of the two companies to be beheaded. Now, the king of Wu was watching from the top of a raised pavilion, and when he saw that his favorite concubines were about to be executed, he was greatly alarmed and hurriedly sent down the following message. We are now quite satisfied as to our general's ability to handle troops. If we are bereft of these two concubines, our meat and drink will lose their savor. It is our wish that they shall not be beheaded. Sun Tzu replied even more patiently. Having once received his Majesty's commission to be general of his forces, there are certain commands of His Majesty which, acting in that capacity, I am unable to accept. Accordingly and immediately, he had the two ladies beheaded, and straightway installed the pair next in order as leaders in their place. When this had been done, the drum was sounded for the drill once more. The girls went through all the evolutions, turning to the right or to the left, marching ahead or wheeling about, kneeling or standing, with perfect accuracy and precision, not venturing to utter a sound, no laughing. Then Sun Tzu sent a messenger to the king, saying, your soldiers, sire, are now properly drilled and disciplined, and ready for your Majesty's inspection. They could be put to any use that their sovereign may desire. Bid them go through fire and water, and they will not now disobey. But the king replied, let our general cease drilling and return to camp. As for us, we have no wish to come down and inspect the troops. Thereupon Sun Tzu said calmly, the king is only fond of words and cannot translate them into deeds. So in other words, he's saying the king is not a warrior. After that, the king of Wu saw that Sun Tzu was one who knew how to handle an army, and appointed him general. In the west, Sun Tzu defeated the Chu state and forced his way into Ying, the capital. To the north, he put fear into the states of Ji and Qin, and spread his fame abroad among the feudal princes. And Sun Tzu shared in the might of the kingdom. So that ends the historical quote. So Sun Tzu became a general for the king of Wu. For almost 2 decades, the armies of Wu were victorious over their hereditary enemies, the kingdom of Yue and Chu. Sometime within this period, Sun Tzu died, and his patron, the king of Wu, was killed in a battle. For a few years, his descendants followed the precepts of Sun Tzu, meaning this book, and continued to be victorious. And then they forgot. In 473 BC, the armies of Wu were defeated and the kingdom made extinct. So that's the background on Sun Tzu. And I like what he said about the general, what the general said about the king. You're not a general, right? So I'm going to share a vignette about the difference between the lady, the diplomat, and the general. You probably heard me say this. In fact, you've probably heard me say it so many times, you could tell it. No. When a lady says no, she means maybe. When a lady says maybe, she means yes. But if a lady says yes, well, she's no lady. When a diplomat says yes, he means maybe. When a diplomat says maybe, he means no. And if a diplomat says no, well, he's no diplomat. When a general says yes, he means yes. When a general says no, he means no. And if a general says maybe, he ain't no general. And that, my friends, is the warrior mindset. All right. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Book 1, Laying Plans. Sun Tzu said, I like it, he's writing it, he's writing this like in the third person. Right? It's a common literary mechanism of some of these ancient Asian authors. The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Just go ask the people who forgot Sun Tzu's teachings. He never lost a battle. You know, and this is why I'm picking him, right? He himself never lost a battle as the head of an army. The same way Miyamoto Musashi never lost a fight, one-on-one sword combat. And it's only when people ignore them that bad things happen. And when you have these kind of experts, we need to pay attention. Hence, under no circumstances can it, the art of war, be neglected. The art of war is governed by 5 constant factors, all of which need to be taken into account. They are the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method and discipline. I think he cheated. He lumped method and discipline into one, but I think that's because of the Chinese character that used can go either way. And when they translated it, whoever did this translation, who did translate this?
Were you guys
See,
seeing that?
somebody's buzzing.
That's mine, apparently.
Did you get any of them?
No, my pen stopped working when I was writing. Will you repeat those, please?
Do you have a pen now?
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay. Why don't you just read them after?
Okay.
Oh, well, I'll read them. Moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method and discipline.
Thank you.
The moral law causes the people to be in complete accord with their ruler, so that they will follow him regardless of their lives, undismayed by any danger. Ancient Chinese philosophy. The emperor came first, the family second, and the individual was third. And only heaven was above the emperor. So that's why you're supposed to follow your ruler. Heaven signifies day and night, cold and heat, times and seasons. Earth comprises distances, great and small, danger and security, open ground and narrow passes, the chances of life and death. The commander stands for the virtues of wisdom, security, benevolence, courage, and strictness. By method and discipline are understood the marshaling of the army in its proper subdivisions, the gradations of rank among the officers, the maintenance of roads by which supplies may reach the army, and the control of military expenditures. So we're talking about the warrior philosophy, the art of war, and this is all very much stalker so far, right? These 5 factors should be familiar to every general. He who knows them will be victorious. He who knows them not will fail. Therefore, when seeking to determine your military conditions, make your decisions on the basis of a comparison in this wise. Which of the two sovereigns, meaning the two nations, is imbued with the moral law? Which of the two generals has the most ability? With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth? On which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Tu Mu, an author, alludes to the remarkable story of Cao Cao, who lived from AD 155 to 220, who was such a strict disciplinarian that once, in accordance with his own severe regulations against injury to standing crops, he condemned himself to death for having allowed his horse to stray into a field of corn. However, in lieu of losing his head, he was persuaded to satisfy his sense of justice by cutting off his hair. When you lay down a law, see that it is not disobeyed, for if it is disobeyed, the offender must be put to death. So, this section continues when you're analyzing the two sides of the war. Which army is the stronger? On which sides are officers and men more highly trained? In which army is there the most absolute certainty that merit will be properly rewarded and misdeeds summarily punished? By the means of these 7 considerations, I can forecast victory or defeat. The general who hearkens to my counsel and acts upon it will conquer. Let such a one be retained in command. The general who hearkens not to my counsel, nor acts upon it, will suffer defeat. Let such a one be dismissed. But remember, while heeding the profit of my counsel, avail yourself also of any helpful circumstances over and beyond the ordinary rules and modify your plans accordingly. So he's saying you have to be flexible here. You can't be rigid. I laid this plan out and I drew these maps of where I was going to march, 6 months ago, and this is what we're doing. Well, but General, the river flooded, and that route you want us to march is under 10 feet of water now. We can't march it. March ahead, right? All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away.
Can you repeat that?
When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away.
Right.
When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hold out baits to entice the enemy. Feign disorder and crush him. If he is secure at all points, be prepared for him. If he is in superior strength, evade him. If your opponent is of choleric temper, meaning easily irritated, seek to irritate him. Pretend to be weak that he may grow arrogant. If he is taking his ease, give him no rest. If his forces are united, separate them. Attack where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. The general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations to defeat. How much more no calculation at all? It is by attention to this point that I can foresee who is likely to win. What are your thoughts so far?
The guidelines are obviously tried and true by Sun Tzu, and he puts them in the book because of the great wisdom they carry. And it's really funny because when I did work for political campaigns, the events that weren't the best were the ones you put a lot of detail and attention to, and everything goes smoothly. But if you leave things to chance, it's not really going to work out so well.
Pretty much. Exactly. I mentioned that the Book of Five Rings we reviewed earlier is used by business trainers all over the world. Started in Japan, and people are like, why are the Japanese so good at negotiating? Why are we always settling for these contracts that are in their favor and not ours? And it's because they use the philosophy from the Book of Five Rings in their planning, and so it's spread. Well, this book is used in a similar manner. Right? And there's times when you need this kind of approach in business negotiation. Whether this or whether the Book of Five Rings, if that's your only guide in a business negotiation, what you are precluding is what has become known as the win-win philosophy. These styles in business are based on the proposition. Preposition? No, where's Dave when I need him?
Supposition.
Proposition that someone must win and the other person must lose. And if that's true, then yeah, you use this. But if it's not true, and it's possible for all sides to win and get what they need at a fair price, then that's a higher level and it leads to much greater long-term earning. So one of your jobs then is to know, when do I go for a win-win, and when am I under attack and have to go for the win-lose, because the other side isn't going to play fair. Any other observations? Who's online?
So we have Nina,
Nina,
Hi, Nina.
Mohadib,
Muad'Dib,
Dennis Brown,
Dennis,
William Rowley,
William,
and Maria Bellotti.
Maria. Good to see you.
Looks like we have 2 other viewers that haven't logged.
2 unknowns. My request to the unknowns is create a YouTube account or a Gmail account, log in, and you can engage in the chat. We would love to engage more with you. Okay, so that was chapter 1, which was called Laying Plans. I think the big take-home message is you need to lay plans if you're going to go to war. Now we get to chapter 2 on waging war. It's like, okay, planning is done, the diplomats failed, and now it's wartime, game on. We got one of those diplomats who said no. Diplomatic efforts failed. In the operations of war, where there are in the field 1,000 swift chariots, 10,000 heavy chariots, 100,000 mail-clad soldiers, mail meaning the armor, right, the chainmail, with provisions enough to carry them 1,000 li, li is a unit of measure, where 2.78 modern li make a mile. The length may have varied slightly since Sun Tzu's time, so that's very close to a kilometer. With provisions enough to carry them 1,000 li, The expenditure at home and at the front, including entertainment of guests, small items such as glue and paint, and sums spent on chariots and armor, will reach the total of 1,000 ounces of silver per day. Such is the cost of raising an army of 100,000 men. When you engage in actual fighting, if the victory is long in coming, the men's weapons will grow dull, and their ardor will be dampened. If you lay siege to a town, you will exhaust your strength, and if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will not be equal to the strain. Never forget, when your weapons are dulled, your ardor dampened, your strength exhausted, and your treasure spent, other chieftains will spring up to take advantage of your extremity. Then no man, however wise, will be able to avert the consequences that must ensue. Thus, though we have heard of stupid haste in war, cleverness has never been associated with long delays. In all history, there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. Maybe we could send this to the people in Washington, D.C. right now. Only one who knows the disastrous effects of a long war can realize the supreme importance of rapidity, being rapid, in bringing it to a close.
Oh.
It is only one who is thoroughly acquainted with the evils of war who can thoroughly understand the profitable way of carrying it on. The skillful general does not raise a second levy, meaning more taxes. Neither are his supply wagons loaded more than twice. Once war is declared, he will not waste precious time in waiting for reinforcements, nor will he turn his army back for fresh supplies, but crosses the enemy's frontier without delay. The value of time, that is, being a little ahead of your opponent, has counted for more than either numerical superiority or the nicest calculations with regard to commissariat, meaning how much money you spend. You may not have much money, you may not have as many people, but get there, get the job done, strike quickly at the right points, at the right time, and end it, is what he said. Bring war material with you from home, but forage on the enemy. Use your enemy's supplies. Thus, the army will have food enough for its needs. Poverty of the state exchequer causes, meaning the guy who writes the checks, causes an army to be maintained by contributions from a distance. Contributing to maintain an army at a distance causes the people to be impoverished. So he's taking into account here the health and welfare of all the people in the state who keep the country going, like the farmers, the blacksmiths, the people who weave and dye fabric, and so on, who live life. You know, if you ruin your country's people, you've ruined the country. You guys in Washington, are you taking notes? On the other hand, the proximity of an army causes prices to go up, and high prices cause people's substance to be drained away. When their substance is drained away, they will be afflicted by heavy extraction. So if you spend too much time and you waste time, the prices go up, and pretty soon they have to pay 10 times as much for a loaf of bread, and then they don't have any money and you can't go tax them anymore. The homes of the people will be stripped bare and their incomes dissipated. At the same time, government expenses for broken chariots, worn-out horses, breastplates and helmets, bows and arrows, spears and shields, protective mantlets, draft oxen and heavy wagons will amount to almost half its total revenue. So he's saying that almost half of the money just goes to supplies and getting them to the front. And only half to the actual army who's going to do the fighting. And that matches estimates I've read from a lot of major campaigns. Your army is never more than half the army is people who actually do the fighting. The rest are the support troops. A wise general makes a point of foraging on the enemy. He said this twice now.
It's important.
One cartload of the enemy, listen to this. One cartload of the enemy's provisions is equal to 20 of one's own. And likewise, a single picule, which is a unit of weight equal to 133 pounds, of his provender, meaning supplies, is equivalent to 20 from one's own stores. So he's saying it costs 20 times to bring your own as to steal from your enemy, who's your enemy. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger. For them to perceive the advantage of defeating the enemy, they must also have their rewards. In other words, plunder. Thus, when you capture spoils from the enemy, they must be used as rewards, so that all your men may have a keen desire to fight, each on his own account. Therefore, in chariot fighting, when 10 or more chariots have been taken, they should be rewarded who took the first. Our own flags should be substituted for those of the enemy, and the chariots mingled and used in conjunction with ours. The captured soldiers, I lost my place. The captured soldiers should be treated kindly and kept. This is called using the conquered foe to augment one's own forces. That probably worked well when most of these armies were mercenaries, right? They weren't like die-hard, flag-waving patriots on either side.
Well, and then the Romans used the conquered people almost immediately. It's kind of like, well, you either sign up and serve as a Roman citizen, or you are going to get plundered. So,
Yeah, and you can, if you have doubts about their loyalty, what was also done is they were given all the menial jobs. They were the ones who drove supply wagons and carried boxes and such. In war, then, let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. Thus it may be known that the leader of armies is the arbiter of the people's fate, the man on whom it depends whether the nation shall be in peace or in peril. So there's a lot of good advice there, right? Get it over. One of the books that we're not going to go through is from Germany. And it's written by a man named von Clausewitz. And it's entitled On War. And he basically goes through a very, it's in some ways considered to be the European equivalent of this book or the Book of Five Rings. And he goes through the notion that this concept of separating diplomacy and war is not real, that one is the extension of the other. And he says, so when diplomacy to resolve a situation peacefully fails and it becomes time for war, then his approach to war is very much like this. Nothing's off limits. You go in, swift, kill, destroy, get it over as fast as possible, as decisively as possible, as impressively as possible, to impress on your enemy your strength and power. Then, when the victory is won, you stop and then let the diplomats sort it out at the end. And failure to adhere to that was the great failing of Vietnam. They made every decision in the Vietnamese War contrary to the Book of Five Rings, it was contrary to the Art of War, and it was contrary to von Clausewitz's On War, on how to wage a war. If you could imagine and sit around drunk and high on a Friday night with a bunch of college people coming up, let's come up with the stupidest ways you could mess up a war. They would never have come up with all the stupid ways that the US military and politicians screwed up the Vietnam War. Never.
But isn't that because that's not why they were there? To fight a war?
Right. They weren't there to win. The Vietnamese War, it's a little off topic from Sun Tzu, but it's pertaining to Asia, so I think that's okay. After World War II, World War II was a great dividing point here for modern humanity. And World War II was when business realized that war is extremely profitable. In the decade leading up to the start of World War II, many American and German companies merged and formed conglomerates. And so these American companies were basically partnered with the German companies, and those conglomerates were profiting off both sides of the war. Much less so with Japan. Japan had a plan that had they been able to follow it, they, in theory, would have taken over the world. Of course, Germany was still working on the plan from World War I that was stymied to take over the world. And so they just kind of dusted off that plan and modified it when they thought they were going to do the same thing. So I always thought, well, okay, suppose Germany won the war in Europe and in Africa, and then they let's say they had a plan to invade the United States, starting in the Northeast. You know, the same way we took supplies to Europe, they were going to go to Iceland, then Greenland, then Nova Scotia, and so that though was when the the big companies realized that if they could pay off the politicians to keep war going perpetually, there was a lot of money to be made. And this is a plot line, one of the plot lines out of Orwell's book, 1984, is perpetual war. It keeps its people in turmoil. It doesn't let them have enough comfort to really get ahead and think about these things. And you keep playing the patriotism card. Oh, if you don't support the war, then you're not a patriot, and boo hiss on you, right? And that's what the Nazis did to rouse the people to war. That's how they roused the people to the hatred of the Jews and the Poles and the Slavs and anybody else that on a whim was suddenly declared to be an enemy of the state. And so the big corporations realized we need to keep this going. The only problem is when the United States military teamed up with the British, both in the Pacific and in Europe, the armies were extremely effective. We won the war too fast. So that according to the politicians who were the puppets of these big money groups. So World War II is safely ended now. And keep in mind, World War I was called the war to end all wars. We'll never have another war because this was it. It was too horrible. Everybody got the message. We can't have more wars like this. Until 20 years go by and we go, you know, it's time for another war. Now that's about what it was. 1918 was when the war ended. And 1939 was when the Nazi machine cranked up and started fighting. So one generation later, everybody forgets how horrible the war was, and let's have another. It was profitable. We made some money last time, so let's do it again. So that's what happened in World War II. And then using Orwell's book as an instruction manual rather than a warning, we need a new enemy. So then, the fear of communism was amped up. Now, let me say this about communism. It's one of those theories that sounds great on paper, and it's never worked anywhere it's been tried. Every communist government is heavily famous for executing its own citizens who don't comply. Russia's done it, China's done it, Cambodia's done it, Cuba's done it. They've all done it. In fact, a lot of capitalist countries do that too. And even calling them communist or capitalist is an injustice. That oversimplifies and overdumbs down this political spectrum. Because neither side is purely capitalist and neither side is purely communist. But the perception that the communists were going to come get us and Russian tanks were going to come rolling down the street was amped up in the mainstream media, right? Just like now. You know, you look back over the last 25 years and every police action / war we've been involved in, the mainstream media is trying to lead people around by the nose. And so we had the Korean War. The communists are going into Korea. So we have to stop them. And then we after killing many, many millions of people, we stopped, drew the line, and ceasefire. Nobody won. And then it's like, oh, Vietnam, we'll go into Southeast Asia and we'll fight the Vietnam thing. The communists on one side and the good guys on the other. But in both those instances, we were very, very careful not to attack the real communists. We didn't attack China. We didn't attack Russia. We drew these lines, right? This is one of the failings of the Vietnamese War. Vietnam is on the ocean side of a peninsula in Southeast Asia. And then the other side are Cambodia and Laos, and at the north, they have a border with China. And the North Vietnamese army was fighting out in North Vietnam. The Viet Cong were basically a citizen militia army. And they were fighting and had crossed the border into Cambodia and Laos with the default permission of the Cambodian and Laotian governments and with the permission of the Chinese. They were attacking South Vietnam from the inland side, not just trying to fight their way down the north. And so our rules of engagement were forbidding us from openly going into Cambodia and Laos to take out the Viet Cong army. And so we were tying one hand behind our back through most of the war. Later on, we sent people in surreptitiously. They weren't wearing American uniforms. We claimed no knowledge. If they had been captured, and some were, they were guaranteed they were going to be executed. And we actually had air bases in Laos that we were operating out of for a time. There was a very poorly done movie, I think it was called Air America, that showed part of that. So this fear of communism, we fed on that. The power brokers who supplied both sides of the war. So Korea, Vietnam, and then in parallel with all that was the Cold War, the nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. we had invented the atomic bomb. Some of our scientists who were involved in that sold the design to the Russians, to the Soviet Union, and they were caught. Some of them were caught and executed. And now we've got politicians selling not just the designs, but selling nuclear materials and equipment to the other side, and they're still walking around, right? So we are in the process of losing our national identities, which is both good and bad. National identities can be a bad thing if they're misused. National identities are a good thing when you honor your culture and you honor your history and you honor your teachings. None of which the people in Washington, D.C. are doing these days. So the communist thing started wearing out when we won the Cold War. The Iron Curtain fell. The Soviet Union was broken up back into its traditional republic. So there was Russia and a whole host of others, Georgia and all these other countries over there, that are back to being separate countries. And now what are we going to do? They still didn't want to take on China in a Cold War because we're so heavily outnumbered. You know, the United States has, what, 360, 370 million people. China has like 2 billion. So we're still, we have advantages in some areas, disadvantages in others. So we still aren't taking on the big guys. If the big guys start taking on each other, the world could end. China, Russia, and the United States each have enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world about 50 times or more. And so that's the one last vestige we have of this concept that Sun Tzu was talking about is war is bad, get it over with quickly. We don't want to go there, it's bad. We didn't really learn the basic war lesson from World War I or even the Civil War. But we seem to have learned from World War II when we dropped 2 atomic bombs, which are pale in comparison to the power with the nuclear weapons we have now, and that we realized that this would just be bad. So let's not go there. The biggest issue we have is that most of the population is unaware of any of this. And and the politicians and the power brokers have created a rift where we have no control and there's very little voice in what's going on in these political situations. So we are now in a state of perpetual war. The war was really bad in World War I and World War II because that World War, it was really bad in World War II also, but the U.S. Civil War back in the 1860s marked the introduction of the combat machine gun. They don't know people really. It was called the Gatling gun because it was invented by a guy named Gatling. And it was a hand crank thing with these big magazines, and they were gravity fed down into this rotating cylinder of barrels, and they could fire hundreds of rounds a minute. And Gatling was a Southerner from Virginia. But he was loyal to the United States. He was working for the North. He had this design, and there were so many politicians and generals who were suspicious of him and his design because he was a Southerner. He's like, heck with that. Here, he would demonstrate it. They wouldn't pay to build them and deploy them.
Thank God.
Well, actually know. If they were available at the start of the war, the South never would have gotten started if we'd had them at the beginning of the war. It would have been over. First Battle of Bull Run, no more Southern Army, all gone. Okay, well that was a failed attempt, South. Now let's be reasonable here. We're ending slavery, and that's that. But no, South came this close to winning because, you know, I watched a documentary once about the Civil War that was mediocre, and one of the guys said, well, the North fought the war with their one hand tied behind their back the whole time, which is the North's fault, right? The North shouldn't have done that. The Gatling gun is just one example. At the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee made one fatal mistake, and that was Pickett's charge. And if he had lured the Union Army in and then slipped away around them, he would have marched on Washington, D.C. and ended the war. He had that chance, and instead he chose to do a charge across 1 mile of open ground. There were no Gatling guns, but it didn't matter because broad daylight in the field. I've been there. I've been to this battlefield.
Me too.
And I don't remember how many thousand Confederate troops charged across that field, but none came back.
They died all of them.
Wiped out to a man. And that ended the South's hopes in that war, because they made a lot of other mistakes. That was the one chance the South had to have won the war, because if the North had developed the Gatling gun on time, they never would have gotten to Gettysburg. If the South had made a different decision instead of Pickett's charge, they could have captured Washington, D.C., captured the president, and forced a truce. We are now a separate country, and you're letting us go our own way. I don't think that would have been for the good of humanity. So, it's 20/20 hindsight, obviously. This is the Monday morning quarterback thing. But that's how we learn, right? That's how we learn that war is bad. We shouldn't drag it out. Is Washington, D.C. on here? Okay, back to Sun Tzu. I don't know how much we'll get through of this, but we're going to continue next week what we don't get through today. Chapter 3, or book 3, is called The Sheathed Sword. So, for those watching at home, this is what a sword looks like when it's in its sheath. To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Makes sense, right?
Read it again.
To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Why would he say that? Isn't fighting and winning a battle a good thing if you have to fight?
You would think so.
Ah, you would be wrong. Sun Tzu says so. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. In the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take your enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is not so good. So too, it is better to capture an army entire than to destroy it. To capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company entire, rather than to destroy them. Thus, the highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. The next best is to prevent the junction of the enemy's forces, combining them. The next in order is to attack the enemy's army in the field. And the worst policy of all is what? Based on what we've said so far. Chapter 1. Huh?
actual fighting?
No, this is the, capturing your army in the field includes fighting. No. The worst policy of all is the besieged wall cities. Because the preparation of mantlets, movable shelters, and the various implements of war will take up 3 whole months, and the piling up of mounds over against the walls will take 3 months more. The general, unable to control his irritation, will launch his men to the assault like swarming ants, with the result that 1/3 of his men are slain, while the town still remains untaken. Such are the disastrous effects of a siege. The skillful leader subdues the enemy's troops without any fighting. He captures their cities without laying siege to them. He overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. With his forces intact, he disrupts the mastery of the empire, and thus, without losing a man, his triumph is complete. This is the method of attacking by stratagem of using the sheathed sword. This is the rule in war. If our forces are 10 to the enemy's 1, to surround him. If 5 to 1, attack him. If twice as numerous, to divide our army into 2, 1 to meet the enemy in front, and 1 to fall upon his rear. If he replies to the frontal attack, he may be crushed from behind. If to the rearward attack, he may be crushed in front. If equally matched, we can offer battle. If slightly inferior in number, we can avoid the enemy. If quite unequal in every way, we can flee from him. Though an obstinate fight may be made by a small force, in the end it must be captured by the larger force. The general is a bulwark of the state. If the bulwark is strong at all points, the state will be strong. If the bulwark is defective, the state will be weak. There are 3 ways in which a sovereign can bring misfortune upon his army. This is, how can the king screw up? Okay? By commanding the army to advance or to retreat, being ignorant of the fact that it cannot obey. This is called hobbling the army. By attempting to govern an army in the same way as he administers a kingdom, being ignorant of the conditions that obtain in an army. So you're too far from the field. Lines of communication, especially then, are slow, but even now. And when the politicians interfere with the general, giving orders that are ridiculous based on the conditions at hand, you're really hurting your chances of winning. It also means the sovereign doesn't just trust the general, or it means the sovereign is just plain nuts, aka Hitler in World War II. This all causes restlessness in the soldiers' minds. Humanity and justice are the principles on which to govern a state, but not an army. Opportunism and flexibility, on the other hand, are military rather than civil virtues. The general and the people in the field have to be given the flexibility to strike. When the opportunity presents itself, you strike. There's a famous story from World War II in Italy. After the Battle of Sicily, we had won in North Africa. We had invaded Sicily and eventually captured it. despite the best efforts of the British and the U.S. High Command to lose that battle. But in the process of winning the battle his way, rather than the High Command's way, General Patton was removed from command. And so when we invaded the Italian mainland, the main peninsula from Sicily, we botched that one up horribly. And to try and alleviate that, we made a beach landing in northern Italy to try and take pressure off our troops, which were bogged down in the middle of the country. And the night they landed, they had complete and total surprise. The Germans weren't expecting it. They didn't know we had even launched a fleet until all of a sudden we're landing. And the scouts of the army drove right into downtown Rome. There was no opposition. They went back, they told the general commander, it's open, we can go. And they had orders no, we're not going. We're gonna go in here, just stop, we're gonna secure a beachhead, and then we'll start moving. Well, that gave the German army time to move a whole big force in and almost crush this thing. They had an opportunity and they were denied the chance to take advantage of it. By employing the officers of his army without discrimination, through ignorance of the military principle of adaptation to circumstances, this shakes the confidence of the soldiers. Sima Qian, about 100 BC, added to this section the following. If a general is ignorant of the principle of adaptability, he must not be entrusted with a position of authority. The skillful employer of men will employ the wise man, the brave man, the covetous man, and the stupid man. For the wise man delights in establishing his merit. The brave man likes to show his courage in action. The covetous man is quick at seizing advantages. And the stupid man has no fear of death. When the army is restless and distrustful, trouble is sure to come from the other feudal princes. This is simply bringing anarchy into the army and flinging victory away. Thus we may know there are 5 essentials for victory. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. Yeah, when you're outnumbering your opponent 10 to 1, the average kindergartner can win that battle. Anybody who's ever played the game of Risk can play that battle. Can win that battle. But when you're outnumbered 10 to 1, to be able to maneuver that to victory, then you got something. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. So this is the concept of that esprit de corps, the fighting spirit. He will win who, prepared himself, waits to take the enemy unprepared. He will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign.
By the what?
The sovereign, the king. Or emperor, or fill in the blank. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. know the enemy, and yourself. That's crucial. Questions? Anybody with questions?
Did Sun Tzu come from the long lineage of military families?
We don't know. Unknown. Remember that in the foreword back here. Little is known of the man himself or when he wrote the 13 chapters. So very little is known about him other than a few basic historical facts, that he wrote this book. He was clearly a lifelong soldier, which means he was an aristocrat. I don't know as much about the breakdown of the social hierarchy in China as I do from Japan. The martial arts I studied, a lot of the history I studied is from Japan and Okinawa, not so much from China. I actually know a lot about the history of China from the standpoint of medicine and healing, less about their armies and warfare. Sun Tzu is my primary, the primary piece of Chinese military history that I've studied. But we have to assume he was from an aristocratic class, whether that meant a military family or just a princely caste, and he went into the military, we don't know. But clearly it was a lifelong vocation for him. He never lost a battle as a general. We don't know how he died, but the implication is, because of this one author, that he died probably of natural causes and was not killed in battle. So we think that. That's kind of what we believe we can infer. And there may be other pieces since this was published last century. I will say, I'm almost to a point after the year 2020 where that's not going to have as much weight. You know, the first 2 or 3 years when we switched from the last century to this century, and once we hit 2001, we're in a new century and a new millennium, right? So I like to joke, well, that wasn't even just last century, that was last millennium. But now we've got a whole generation of people who were born in this century, this millennium, and have no concept. So they don't find it as fun, which is too bad. I blame our educational system.
Exactly.
All right. We probably have time for one more chapter. Maybe 2, but we'll see. Oh, this one's short, so yeah, we'll get 2 more. Chapter 4 is called Tactics. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands. But the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Hence the saying, one may know how to conquer without being able to do it. Security against defeat implies defensive tactics. Ability to defeat the enemy means taking the offensive. Standing on the defensive indicates insufficient strength. Attacking, a superabundance of strength. So you can kind of infer certain things from these two about what your enemy is doing, right? The general who is skilled in defense hides in the most secret recesses of the earth. He who is skilled in attack flashes forth from the topmost heights of heaven. Thus, on the one hand, we have ability to protect ourselves. On the other, to gain a victory that is complete. Now, those are obviously analogies. Maybe you're hiding in the recesses of the earth, but that means it doesn't mean you dug a hole and went underground, and it doesn't mean you're up floating in the air and you swoop down, right? It's figurative. To see victory only when it is within the ken of a common herd is not the acme of excellence, nor is it the acme of excellence if you fight and conquer and the empire says, well done. True excellence is to plan secretly, to move surreptitiously, to foil the enemy's intentions and balk his schemes, so that at last the day may be won without shedding a drop of blood. To lift an autumn hair is no sign of great strength. To see the sun and moon is no sign of sharp sight. To hear the noise of thunder is no sign of a quick ear. Meaning anybody can do this. What the ancients called a clever fighter is one who not only wins, but excels in winning with ease. But his victories bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage. For inasmuch as they are gained over circumstances that have not come to light, the world at large knows nothing of them, and he therefore wins no reputation for wisdom. Inasmuch as the hostile state submits before there has been any bloodshed, he receives no credit for courage. He wins his battles by making no mistakes. Making no mistakes is what establishes the certainty of victory, for it means conquering an enemy that is already defeated. Hence, the skillful fighter puts himself into a position that makes defeat impossible and does not miss the moment for defeating the enemy. Thus it is that in war, the victorious strategist only seeks battle after the victory has been won. Thus it is that in war, the victorious strategist only seeks battle after the victory has been won, whereas he who is destined to defeat first fights and afterwards looks for victory. That, in a nutshell, summarizes the Confederate Army during the Civil War. They were pushing for a fight, they were pushing for a fight, they were pushing for a fight, and they did not plan. Well, how are we going to do that? They all ran off to war, they got on their horses, they grabbed their swords, they charged off to battle, and then they figured out, well, what should we do?
Right.
A victorious army opposed to a routed one is as a pound's weight placed on the scale against a single grain. The onrush of a conquering force is like the bursting of pent-up waters into a chasm 1,000 fathoms deep. The consummate leader cultivates the moral law and strictly adheres to method and discipline. Thus, it is in his power to control success. So much for tactics. If the Confederates had planned and looked at everything, they would have, and then listened to the military planners, they would have said, this is nuts. We should not do this. We need to find another way of solving this without war, because they had no chance. I mean, the fact that they drug it out a little over 4 years was more a sign of Northern Union Army complacency than great genius. They had a few good commanders in the South, Robert E. Lee, but he had one of his hands tied behind his back. He didn't have supplies. He didn't have the South had no industrial capacity. They were all agrarian. And the North, for the first 2 years of the war, all the upper level commanders were what we call a peacetime general, as opposed to a wartime battle general. And the first real, you can make a case for General Meade, but the first real battle general they got, the first real wartime general the North got, was Ulysses S. Grant, and he's the one who won the war. There's a whole history of the Civil War, which is interesting study if you really want to study tactics. Just read about that. And both sides made numerous mistakes.
Well, the South had a blockade that kept them from selling. The only
Right.
thing they had of any value.
Right,
They had no way
they
to
were-
get resources in.
right. They couldn't produce them themselves. They couldn't get them in.
Yeah.
They made dozens, if not hundreds, of serious mistakes. The North made dozens of, at least many dozens of mistakes. The North should have won that war in 6 months. Flat out. The fact that it took almost 5 years
Which would have done a service to everyone.
right. Instead of how I looked this up recently. Something like 750,000 people between the two sides died in that war. If it's going to go to war and you want it ended, it should have been under 100.
Yeah.
Think of how different our world would be if the South had planned and realized this is nuts.
Like there was a lot of arrogance among
Oh yeah, there's a lot of reasons why. Okay.
the aristocracy.
I think I'm going to read chapter 5, which is entitled Energy, and then I'll take questions and then we'll end for today. Energy. The control of a large force is the same in principle as with the control of a few men. It is merely a question of dividing up their numbers. Fighting with a large army under your command is no wise different from fighting with a small one. It is merely a question of instituting signs and signals, so communicate. To ensure that your whole host may withstand the brunt of the enemy's attack and remain unshaken, use maneuvers direct and indirect. In all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed in order to secure victory. Indirect tactics, efficiently implied, are as inexhaustible as heaven and earth, unending as the flow of rivers and streams, like the sun and moon. They end but to begin anew. Like the 4 seasons, they pass away but to return again. There are no more than 5 musical notes. Well, he's actually incorrect there. Yet the combinations of these 5 give rise to more melodies than can ever be heard. Now, maybe that was true with instruments, but our musical scale is, 10 or 12 notes? When you add up all the sharps and flats? Yeah, something like that. There are no more than 5 primary colors, yet in combination they produce more hues than can ever be seen. There are not more than 5 cardinal tastes: sour, acrid, salt, sweet, and bitter. Yet combinations of them yield more flavors than can ever be tested. Tasted, not tested. In battle, however, there are not more than 2 methods of attack, the direct and the indirect. Yet these 2 in combination give rise to an endless series of maneuvers. The direct and the indirect lead on to each other in turn. It is like moving in a circle. You never come to an end. Who can exhaust the possibilities of their combination? The onset of troops is like the rush of a torrent that will even roll stones along its course. The quality of decision is like the well-timed swoop of a falcon that enables it to strike and destroy its victim. Therefore, the good fighter will be terrible in his onset and prompt in his decision. Energy may be likened to the bending of a crossbow, decision to the releasing of the trigger. Energy and decision. Amid the turmoil and tumult of battle, there may be seeming disorder and yet no real disorder at all. Amid confusion and chaos, your array may be without head or tail, yet it will be proof against defeat. Simulated disorder postulates perfect discipline. Simulated fear postulates courage. Simulated weakness postulates strength. Hiding order beneath the cloak of disorder is simply a question of subdivision. Concealing courage under a show of timidity presupposes a fund of latent energy. Masking strength with weakness is to be affected by tactical disposition. Chang Yu relates the following anecdote of Liu Pang, the first Han emperor who lived 256 to 195 BC. Wishing to crush the Swing Nu, he sent out spies to report on their condition. But the Swing Nu, forewarned, carefully concealed all their able-bodied men and well-fed horses, and only allowed infirm soldiers and emaciated cattle to be seen. The result was that the spies, one and all, recommended the emperor to deliver his attack. Liu Qing alone opposed them, saying, "When two countries go to war, they are naturally inclined to make an ostentatious display of their strength. Yet our spies have seen nothing but old age and infirmity. This is surely some ruse on the part of the enemy, and it would be unwise for us to attack." The emperor, however, disregarding this advice, fell into the trap and found himself surrounded at Po Teng. I don't know the end of that story, but apparently the emperor lost. Thus, one who is skillful at keeping the enemy on the move maintains deceitful appearances, according to which the enemy will act. He sacrifices something that the enemy may snatch at. By holding out baits, he keeps him on the march, then with a body of picked men, he lies in wait for him. In 341 BC, the Qi state, being at war with Wei, sent Tianqi and Sun Ping against the general Pang Chuan, who happened to be a deadly personal enemy of the latter. So apparently those two didn't like each other. Sun Pin said, "The Qi state has a reputation for cowardice, and therefore our adversary despises us. Let us turn this circumstance to account." Accordingly, when the army had crossed the border into Wei territory, he gave orders to show 100,000 fires on the first night, 50,000 on the next, and the night after, only 20,000. Pan Chuan pursued them hotly, saying to himself, I knew these men of Qi were cowards. Their numbers have already fallen away by more than half. In his retreat, Sun Pin came to a narrow defile, a very narrow pass in a canyon, which he calculated his pursuers would reach after dark. Here he had a tree stripped of its bark and inscribed on it the words, Under this tree shall Pan Chuan die. Then, as night began to fall, he placed a strong body of archers in ambush nearby, with orders to shoot directly if they saw a light. Later on, Pan Chuan arrived at the spot, and noticing the tree, he struck a light in order to read what was written on it. His body was immediately riddled by a volley of arrows, and his whole army thrown into confusion. The clever combatant looks to the effect of combined energy and does not require too much from individuals. He takes individual talent into account and uses each man according to his capabilities. He does not demand perfection from the untalented. When he utilizes combined energy, his fighting men become, as it were, like rolling logs or stones. For it is the nature of a log or stone to remain motionless on level ground and to move when on a slope. If four-cornered, to come to a standstill, but if round-shaped, to go rolling down. Thus, the energy developed by good fighting men is as the momentum of a round stone rolled down a mountain thousands of feet in height. So much on the subject of energy. Well, that's all he has to say. This energy is what we cultivate, right, with our Toltec work. And he's talking about several times tonight the collective consciousness. They have to have the same spirit, they have to have good energy, they have to be all on the same wavelength, right? And when they are, they're an unstoppable force. Questions?
Okay, this book seems to have so much wisdom, and I'm assuming that at some point after it was published, it was made widely available to Chinese military. So I guess my question is, what happens when these art forms, these techniques, become so ingrained in the military? I mean, is this the process of true diplomacy, that you recognize, everyone recognizes each other's strengths and weaknesses? What happens when you're all following these same principles and you can see the flaws in each other's positions?
Well, first of all, we're all human, and everybody makes mistakes. Nobody has in a war or a battle complete knowledge. Never. And everybody has good days and bad days, right? I once read a short story that was hypothetical fiction on what if Grant had been drunk at Appomattox. Appomattox is where the two armies had been fighting. Lee was trapped. But what if Grant had been drunk and he showed up when Lee was going to surrender to him, and instead he's like, General, come on in. You got to go here. You're meeting General Lee. It's time for the surrender. And Grant being drunk, oh, okay. And what if Grant had taken off his sword and given it to Lee, which is the sign of surrender? The general gives his sword to the enemy. And all of a sudden, the Union Army surrenders.
Interesting.
Yeah. So people make mistakes. So if everybody really followed this, then hopefully what could happen is we all realize the futility of war. And we stop trying to kill each other. That's one thing that could happen. Another thing that could happen is you get one side, like the Chinese right now, who are so much more numerous than the other sides that they don't care if their weaknesses are known. You know, they're going to keep sending billions of people over in waves until we run out of people. Right? That's one of their, quite frankly, one of their plans. Knowing that, we know the numbers, they know the numbers. One of our plans is we have no choice but to nuke them in their country. As soon as they start, the cruise missiles launch, and we blow up their whole country. We have enough. We could do it. They know it, and we know it. We know that that's the job. So we sit in this fluid state of truth. It's very much like the Cold War. We announced with the Chinese instead of the Russians, and this one's not being advertised. And some of the fighting is actually being done with commerce and trade, right? The tariffs, the whole tariff thing going on right now. So those are some of the possibilities. On a smaller scale, the wise general, the wise antagonists will look at that and realize, okay, we know it, they know it. This isn't going to be a good outcome. You know, it's like when the people that go through the tournaments and they get the final two that are going to, who gets to play the world chess champion for the right to be the new world chess champion. And they're so good, so evenly matched. Okay, you keep playing until one side has, one of the two players has 20 points. You get 1 point for a win. You get a half a point for a draw. You get 0 points for a loss in these big chess tournaments. And so you never know how long it's going to take. It could take you over in 20 days. Never has. Or it could go on. You know, you could play the first 40 games and they could all be a draw, and so you both got 20 points, but nobody's actually won a game yet. And it goes on and on and on. And so these people, these two individuals playing each other, they know each other, they know each other's tactics, they know each other's strength, but they're playing, right? And one day somebody makes a goof. And it's going to be one of those obscure things that isn't obvious to somebody who's only at the ability to save like me. And it'll be some obscure factoid that one of them remembers from having studied an ancient game from 200 or 300 years ago, which we have a lot of records for, right? You know, when you go read chess books, oh, here was between, you know, Smith and Jones in 1820, you know, and here's the game they played, and you go, oh yeah, if I see this combination, here's how I take advantage of it, right? And then it plays out 12 or 15 years later. You've got that one pawn advantage, and that's enough to win the game. So if you get that one win and your opponent has a loss, then to win the World Chess Championship, all you're doing now is every day you're playing for a draw. Let's say you drew the first 10 games, you're both at 5 points, and then one of you wins. So now it's 6-5. So you're looking for 14 more draws and you're the World Chess Champion. And that's how they decide it.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of what you're asking is, what if everybody's that equally matched, and if these chess pieces were real people and real armies and not just pieces of ceramic or ivory or whatever? Oh, I saw a thing today on the internet that somebody in England had in their family's history one of the Lewis chess pieces.
It had been in a drawer.
So the Lewis chess pieces, you go back, were found on the Isle of Lewis, which is in Scotland in the Outer Hebrides, and there had been an encampment of some kind there of Vikings. These are Scandinavian Norsemen. And they left a couple, 3 chess sets there. Identical to the chess sets we play with today. Same pieces, same moves, same kind of board, everything. And these were found, they were parsed out, and most of them are in the British Museum of London, but there's a bunch of them in the museum in Scotland, the National Museum of Scotland, which I've been to. And when Bonnie and I got there, we were visiting, the first thing we asked the docent when we go is, where are the Lewis chess pieces? He smiled at that. That's the most common request we get. You go right here, you go right there, and it's just down the first aisleway, right? In a glass, I'm sure a bulletproof glass case, so even if you took a club, you couldn't break into it, right? So, hand carved from walrus ivory, all these pieces. And so, these people had it in their possession. Their grandfather had been an antique dealer, and they had a receipt that he'd paid £5 for this one chess piece, and it was identified as being a walrus ivory chess man that he paid some other guy £5 for from a different dealer. And so the grandfather died, the grandmother had it, and she kind of liked it and kept it around as a family keepsake. And now she thinks it's magic, right? Probably is. And so then the grandmother dies, and the family's like, well, I wonder what it's worth. So they went to Sotheby's, however that's pronounced, Sotheby's, which is a big auction house in London. And they have this thing where you walk, kind of like Antiques Roadshow, right? Where you walk in, you say, I got this thing, how much it's worth. And so they call an expert in that department. If it's a painting or a statue or a chess piece, then they come in. The right guy gets a call, come down, there's somebody you have to appraise, right? So the guy who appraises things like this came down and took one look and went, holy moly, right? £1 million it's worth. The guy had paid 50 years ago, paid £5 for it, and it's worth $1 million. So anyway, yeah, chess. If those were real armies, and you went through saying, well, we've got to get to 20 points, think how many millions of people would get destroyed. Right? The Chinese really want to go. Well, we're launching the arsenal, right? And we have every target targeted in, right? It's the exact location, that range, and not just once, but 2 or 3 times in case one of our missiles gets shot down or has a failure en route. So it would be and the world would probably end. Because we wouldn't win a war where it's pick up a sword or pick up a gun and roll your tanks down the road and fight the Chinese. We could not win that war. We could win the nuclear war. We could win that war with some of our space-based weaponry, which doesn't exist. So ignore all those videos on the internet of space-based lasers firing and shooting things down. That's probably just CG. Ignore all the forest fires that are started in California using those weapons, because I'm sure those the people that we know from Paradise who lost their homes in those types of fires because everything they owned burned down, I'm sure that was all just CG too, right? It had to have been. Surely our government wouldn't do that to us. So we don't know who the enemy is anymore. You know, this started back World War I into World War II, when the business conglomerates got together and figured out there's money to be made in war. And like Orwell points out in the book 1984, there's money to be made in perpetual war, but only if you keep the populace under control, which is what they're trying to do. And you look at countries around the world that are in complete disarray. That's the result. So places in Middle East, places in Africa, places in South America, places in Asia. Total chaos, total disarray. And it's all because the power brokers are going for perpetual war. Did anyone ever see the movie with Chevy Chase called Deal of the Century? No. It's a comedy, and he's an arms dealer. And he stumbles into a big deal where he was a small times arms dealer. He sold, like machine guns and grenade launchers, right? Well, he stumbles into a deal where a guy who represents a big weapons company is trying to sell drones. Some of the first remote-controlled aircraft that are more maneuverable and will give this small, petty Central American dictator an advantage over all his neighbors, and he'll get to take over Central America or South America. I can't remember where they set, which fictitious country they set this in. And the arms dealer is so freaked out and stressed out, he commits suicide just before the call comes in that they want to close the deal. So Chevy Chase answers the phone, and he starts making a deal, but at one point, the deal's kind of stalled. It's not going forward. He can't figure out what the deal is. And so these two armed men kidnap him, put him in a limousine, take him out to the airport, put him on a private Learjet. And inside is the world's most famous arms dealer.
Oh boy.
And he says, hey, have a seat, have some wine, have some liquor. I just need to talk to you. He says, you're on the verge of a really big deal. Why isn't it going through? I don't know. Here, have some more drink. He says, well, what have you done so far? He says, well, what have you offered as a gift to the general who's the head of this country as a token of your appreciation, i.e. a bribe? It's one thing to sell to the country, but you have to bribe the general, which Chevy didn't understand. He's never dealt at these high levels before. So he says, I haven't done anything. Oh, well, you need to make a gift as a token of your appreciation. Oh, the general had given him a gift, Chevy a gift. It was like 2 crystal goblets or something like that. And what have you given the general? And Chevy's like, oh, okay. So then they arranged, like a $1 million cash donation to the general personally, and then the deal goes through. But as part of this conversation, he says, you need to understand this arms business. Whichever side wins, we win. Whichever side loses, we win. We don't care who wins. You're selling arms to both sides, we win. You should know this.
Indeed.
And that's what's going on in our world right now. And it's a complete violation of all these principles of war and principles of the warrior mindset that we are studying here. And what we're seeing is our modern warriors are being horribly taken advantage of. They're playing a patriotism card, and we have thousands of young men and women volunteering as if they were going off to fight the battle with the Nazis rolling their tanks down Main Street, USA. And we're here to defend our family, our country, our home. And that's not what's happening. We're fighting for opium fields in Afghanistan that can flood the opioid epidemic here. We're fighting for oil. We're fighting for the sake of fighting because look where the money's going. Dick Cheney, who was vice president of the U.S., owns Halliburton, and they get all the money to then do whatever it is Halliburton does. Right. So we're into the state of perpetual war that George Orwell warned us about. This is not a true warrior situation. And what needs to happen is all our warriors need to walk away. They need to lay down their weapons and walk. No, you need to take their weapons with them and walk away from the battle. They need to just stop waiting for orders from Washington. They need to load up their planes. They need to load up their weapons. They need to bring our tanks home and come home. And then we all need to take our automatic weapons and our grenade launchers and have them over the fireplace hearth and ready to use to defend ourselves if the need ever rises. And if every American home had half a dozen grenade launchers and half a dozen machine guns and countless rounds of ammunition for their pistols and rifles, crime would become almost non-existent. Our warriors are being taken advantage of. They aren't being allowed to win, and they're being sent to fight for all the wrong reasons. And it's only a matter of time until this house of cards comes crashing down. And this is the word that needs to get out. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Should I check and see?
Yeah, go ahead and see if there's anything online. So we made it about halfway, maybe not quite. And we'll finish the other half next week. And then the week after, I have several other miscellaneous things. I'm going to read more contemporary authors. Question?
Have you seen the movie Thrive?
Thrive? I think so, but a long time ago. I probably need to watch it again.
It talks about a lot of the stuff in it.
It talks about this stuff, and it also talks similar to the stuff in my book I just published. So, yeah, heal your life, heal the world. Go to the website, drcagesays.org. It's a modern scientific presentation of the concepts of the ancient Toltec philosophy of life called the Toltec, which is how to live holistically and in harmony. Anything online of interest?
Just one thing, Nina said that Golden Eagle mentioned that he would talk about training in martial arts with him. Now, she has since signed off, but
Oh, she has since signed off. She probably couldn't stay the whole time.
yeah.
Okay.
She did say though, thank you, lots to ponder. Hugs.
Here's the deal. I've been involved in martial arts and the study of karate for 29 years. I know a little now. I just, in the last week and a half, over the course of that time, I have reactivated my membership in one of the largest national martial arts teaching organizations called the American Teachers Association of the Martial Arts, known by its acronym ATAMA. So I've reactivated that, and in the course of that process, because of my time since my last promotion, I've been promoted to 4th degree black belt, or 4th dan, as it's called. And I'm in the process of getting set up to resume teaching karate classes. I don't know the details of what that's going to look like here. I'm building a training ground here on our property. I may look around the area and find a martial arts school that I could work out of like one day a week for starters. But that is happening. It's time. This whole process that we're going through in this Toltec work, where for this school I'm instilling and explaining the warrior mindset that many of you needed a boost in, it's had its effect on me as well, and I realized that the time is now to do that. So I am doing that. And my schedule is quite variable. It would be really nice to have the same day of the week every week be the time when I teach my karate class. And I don't have a day of the week that will qualify on that regard, with the possible exception of Friday. But then there's a lot of things I have on Fridays, like driving somewhere else to be somewhere Saturday morning. So no matter what day we pick, it's not going to be the same day each week. So that's that. If you're interested, you need to contact me. And I will tell you that this style of karate I teach is purely self-defense oriented. It is not for sport, it is not for tournaments. You will not win trophies learning the kind of things I teach. Trophies are they serve a purpose, especially for the youth, to get them focused, to teach them some skills. Sport karate teaches timing and fitness and some of that martial spirit. It mostly, however, does not teach you the things that will save your life if you are really attacked. Some of the techniques I can teach when you have enough skill and proficiency are the kind of things that will end a fight in 3 seconds or less because the opponent is dead. If you're going to do all the time and effort to train, make it useful. This isn't a sport, this is serious. As hopefully by now, after gone through the Book of Five Rings, and we're halfway through the Art of War, hopefully you will have realized that when you look around the world at everything that's going on, the zombie apocalypse has actually started. When you see the kind of brainwashed, brain-dead people running around, and everywhere in this country and others, governments are washing their hands saying, you know, we're going to stop prosecuting violent crime. Individual cities, towns, and counties in this country have already said, well, we're just not going to prosecute any more crime. That's telling criminals everywhere, come here and enjoy. You can rape, pillage, loot, burn, and kill with total impunity. And when that happens, the government won't protect you. They won't stop the criminals. They're already telling you that they won't stop the criminals. And you can call 911 and nobody will come to help you. If you want to be helped, you will have to help yourself. So, help yourself. Your greatest weapon is your mind. And that's what you have to train first. All the other skills, like Bruce Lee said, absorb what is useful, learn what you can do. Those of you with bad knees, you can't do a lot of what I will do, what I teach. But there's things I can teach you that you can do. Remember Samuel Colt's great admonition. Pistol was the great equalizer. Right? The day is not far away from coming when we will all be carrying swords and other weapons. Learn to use them. Learn to use your body as a weapon. That's what I teach. So, in closing, this is one of the contemporary authors I will be looking at in a couple of weeks. One of two or three. I want to share just a couple of quotes. So this book, for those keeping track at home, Living the Marshall Way by Forrest Morgan, who was an Air Force major. And in here, he has, in chapter 1, it is called The Warrior Mindset. And his quote, he has quotes at the beginning of each chapter. And this is by Gichin Funakoshi, who I'm sure you all know, was the leader of the people who moved karate from Okinawa into Japan in the 19-teens and the 1920s, where it was heavily watered down from its martial aspects and used to train the spirit and the physical fitness in the Japanese university system for the young men that became the officer corps for World War II. So here's what Funakoshi's first rule for the study of Karate Do. You must be deadly serious in training. When I say that, I do not mean that you should be reasonably diligent or moderately in earnest. I mean that your opponent must always be present in your mind, whether you sit or stand or walk or raise your arms. It's total commitment to training if you're going to be the warrior. Oh, that's not the one. Oh, here it is. This is the one. This is from Bruce Lee in his book, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Jeet Kune Do was the way he approached martial arts. I hope martial artists are more interested in the root of martial arts and not the different decorative branches, flowers, or leaves. It is futile to argue as to which leaf, which design of branches, or which attractive flower you like. When you understand the root, you understand all its blossoming. So a lot of people expend a lot of energy arguing which is the best form of martial arts. And Bruce Lee is telling them you're all nuts. Provided it's a real martial art and not a sport. Sport martial arts have a place. That place is not on the battlefield. That's why I don't teach it. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for watching online. If you're interested, let me know.
Deep says, no questions, but give everyone my love. Tell George I look forward to seeing him when he comes back.
Thank you, Muad'Dib. Okay,
Love you.
we're going to go offline. Do you know that?
Love you all.
I will show you.
Sweet
Will says
Susan.
thank you.
All right. So you come back over to here and you say